Hi, I'm Adrian Gordon, and today I want to walk you through my own compositional process and evolution of a piece from beginning to the end using one of my own compositions entitled Pizzicato Paradise. My hope is that by the end of this video, you'll walk away with a few ideas of your own for your music. You know, one of the most common statements I've heard from my students and colleagues alike throughout my entire career is, I could play, but I could never compose. And I always feel saddened by that because the profession is always in need of new music. And who better to contribute to the world of composition than talented performers who intimately understand the complexities of their instrument and the instruments around them. You know, if you think about it, if you can make small talk with a stranger or tell a witty, well-placed joke, then you can compose. When you're doing these things, you've simply taken your mastery of the language and you've improvised to create something new. And that's exactly what we do as composers. We're just simply putting it down on paper. So that leads me back to our discussion about composing. Now, full disclosure, this lesson is more applicable to the musician who has a basic understanding of how to play their instrument rather than a beginner, but anybody should still be able to pick a couple things up. So the first thing that I would do, and I would recommend that you do, is to brainstorm. Now, the approach that I took wasn't strictly theoretical, and you don't have to have a strict music theory approach either. And there's nothing wrong with approaching your composition with music theory, but for me personally, I find that my mind works a little bit better when I approach the composition process from a more organic starting point, and then later on, I assign some of the more theoretical components to what I'm doing. So there's a couple ways to go about brainstorming when you're composing. A lot of people sing on their voice memos on their phone just to get an idea across. And some of you are thinking, wait, I can't sing. And it's okay. You don't have to be able to sing. You just want to get the idea out so you don't forget it. You can even talk about it on the voice memo, describing some of the elements of the music that haven't quite come into focus, but at least you have a general idea about them. But the idea is just to start building something concrete. So you can also do something as simple as drawing a picture that captures the imagery of what you want to get across. In my opinion, after all, good music is good storytelling. You can also get out some staff paper and write out any rhythmic or melodic motifs that may be running through your mind. So I personally like to wrap everything together in a compositional tool that I developed for my students called a CMM, or a composition mind map. And I'll leave a link in the description below in case you want a copy for yourself. But remember, this isn't an absolute or definitive way to create music, but a way to just simply help you get started. So let's take a look at the piece Pizzicato Paradise and how I went through and answered some of the questions in the beginning stages of when I first started writing this piece. Okay, so here's the CMM, or the composition mind map, and you can see up here at the top I have the desired ensemble and the timbre. And just a quick note, I put solo here, so I want you guys to feel encouraged that whenever you write or compose, you don't have to be writing the next big symphony. As long as what you're writing is honest, it's authentic, that's good enough. And I think that will be communicated to the people who are listening to it. So anyway, I have a solo piece here. For the timbre, I wanted it to be really bright, and I wanted to use plucked instruments, and I wanted it to be strummed. Then the instrument family is string, because I wanted to use the violin as the medium. So let's get started with some of these questions. Here's number one. The estimated length of the music you want to write, and remember, this can change at any time depending on your needs. I figured when I was writing this, it was only going to be about 2 or 3 minutes long, and nothing more than that. It would be overdone if I went over. Then number two, tempo of the music, slow, medium, fast, or a combination. And I knew that I wanted this to be kind of fun, upbeat, so that's what I wrote right here. Number three, any words that come to mind for the piece you want to write. And I had a few, so I actually had a couple words here. I'm going to go through them. First one was beach, fun, island, vacation, Caribbean, ocean, ukulele, guitar, and strum. So all these words came to mind and they helped me focus my composition. Then number four, possible titles. I knew I wanted the first word of the title to be pizzicato. So that helped guide the direction of the composition as well. But I didn't know what it was going to be called after that. I just knew pizzicato something. And it could have been anything, but I just knew the first word would be pizzicato. So again, that helped me guide the composition and how I'd be writing. And then number 5, how do you want to format your composition? When I first started, I didn't have much. The only thing I had was the introduction. And you can see I have question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, because I really didn't know what the next part of the piece would be. I didn't know what the format was. I didn't know form. And what I did was I just kind of wrote this down, song format. So that's the way I was kind of thinking about this composition. I kind of figured, all right, I have my introduction. Then I wanted to do something like a pre-chorus that you would see in a song, but that's all I had. I didn't have much, and that's okay. You don't have to have everything concrete. Remember, this is just a brainstorm or a mind map to help you get started. Number 6, rhythmic, melodic motifs that come to mind. When I started, I had the G chord, and you can see what I did. I wrote a couple notes here with an imaginary staff, but I have my open G, open D, first finger B, and then second finger G on the E string. And then I have strummed like a ukulele. So this was the motif that I had. I knew that I wanted that G chord, that one chord, and I wanted it to be pretty big and open, and I think I achieved that because I had the open D and the open G string, which were really resonant. And then number 7, progression that comes to mind. I didn't have a progression, but like I said, I had the one chord, which was the G. And I did kind of fiddle around with where would I go from that. And I did kind of come up with the idea of coming to the 5 chord, which would have been that D major chord, which is an easy transition because I just had to move one finger over to that F sharp on the E string. And then I was able to play the open D, open A, and then the F sharp. So that was an easy find, but that's all I had. I didn't know what the rest of the progression would look like. And then number 8, possible key signature or key signatures of the music you want to write. I knew it was going to be in G major. That was my one chord. That was my home base. So that was pretty easy. And number 9, possible time signatures. I knew it was going to be in 4/4, and I didn't foresee it changing much because I wanted to be consistent. I wanted different character in the different sections, but not necessarily meter changes. So I kept it in 4/4. And then number 10, if applicable, what reminds you of the music you are trying to create? A person, a memory, an animal, an image, an object, a season, a poem, a story, a picture. And here's what I wrote. I said, someone steps on an island for the first time for their long-awaited vacation. Maybe it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years since they've had a vacation. What is the first musical sound they want to hear? And that was a really, really big push because that made me really think about how am I going to direct this music so that a person, or that imagery, a person stepping off a plane onto an island for their long-awaited vacation, how am I going to make them happy? What's going to make them happy? And it wouldn't be anything dreary, it wouldn't be anything somber, so I had to make sure that the pacing of the music and the direction of the music stayed on task, I guess, with this imagery. And then number 11, what story do you want to tell? And for me, I said something fun, which is kind of explained in the last question. And then the story of one's vacation. So when you go on vacation, typically it's not just fun. There is some downtime, there is some rest. And I wanted to emulate that. I wanted it to be fun, but I wanted to show the different stages of vacation. And I think you see that later on in the music. So there's that. And then number 12, draw an image below that helps bring your ideas into focus. It can be anything and does not need to be a work of art. So that's really important. Whatever you draw, it really doesn't have to be something that the rest of the world is going to appreciate as high art. You just need something for you. And you can see what I drew here
I have my little beach or island here, and I got my stick figures, of course. It's the best I could do. And this here on top is supposed to be the water. And then you see my palm trees with coconuts on this side and this side. I've got my birds in the background, and I've got a nice warm sun. So that's the imagery, that's the image that I wanted to draw to help me focus and zero in on the direction of the music. So this is a CMM, the composition mind map, and now we'll go on to the next step.
All right, now that we have some broad ideas down, the next step is to dig a little bit deeper and think about a melody or motif and or progression that helps bring your piece into focus. Now maybe you don't have a set idea about a melody or progression, and that's okay. As you saw from my CMM, I only had 2 chords that I was working with when I started. So when you feel completely stuck on this step, the best thing to do is to set limitations. And I know that may seem counterintuitive, but it's much more effective than staring at a blank page for hours. So maybe set limitations like I'm only going to use a 3-note motif, or my melody will incorporate the intervals of a perfect 5th and a perfect 4th, or my composition will incorporate a 1-4-5-1 progression, or my melody will be a series of arpeggios. Sometimes the hardest part is just getting started. And once you have something down, you can at least build from your starting momentum and tweak and move things around to your liking. But before we move on, let's talk a little bit about what constitutes a good quote-unquote melody. And understand that the ideas that I'm going to give you are only ideas, and even though some of these ideas are common practice, they are still subjective. So, number 1, good melodies limit their range within an octave, maybe an octave and a half. Number 2, good melodies have recurring elements like interval patterns and rhythmic patterns that listeners can easily recite. Number 3, good melodies tend not to have large interval jumps, but rather stepwise motion and occasional leaps. And number 4, good melodies tend to have a climactic point or a high point in the phrase where the highest note is reached. Now, these are just a few subjective ideas about melodies that hopefully will give you a little bit of direction in your writing. Now that you have some concrete ideas spelled out, the next step is to think about how you want to get started documenting or transcribing the music. Some people enjoy the intimacy of writing their music out by hand, but I personally prefer using notation software. I'd recommend using notation software because it's typically the industry standard, and it's always good to be aware of the best practices. So there are several options to choose from when it comes to notation software. For instance, you have Finale, Sibelius, MuseScore, Notion 6, or Noteflight, just to name a few. Again, there's no wrong or right answer, only the best option that will aid you in your creative pursuit. Personally, I've had success in terms of learning curve and how intuitive the program is with Finale, but this will look different for everyone. So check out the trial options and see which software works best for you. So with my piece Pizzicato Paradise, I knew I wanted to have somewhat of an introduction like you saw in the mind map, and I started out with strumming to emulate a ukulele and create an island feel right from the opening. I also started out with a G chord, and that seemed easy enough because the way it was fingered, I was using my open G, my open D, and then placing my first finger on the B, and then high G. And that gave the chord a nice resonance that would also be comfortable to play. Then at random I started to play around with some rhythms, and I came up with this. I liked that rhythm, so I started notating. And it was a tricky rhythm, so I started from the end of the measure because I had a clear idea of where beat 4 was, and then I worked my way backwards. So let's take a look at what it looks like on paper. So as you can see, I started out with this rhythm. Here's my G chord, and it was tricky finding what the pattern was going to be. So what I did is I started with 4. I knew I was starting with beat 4, and it was 4-ienda, and then I worked my way back. So I knew it was 1, E, and E, 4-ienda, and that was the strum pattern. So this whole bar was a G chord, my 1 chord. Then I moved on to my 5 chord with the same rhythmic pattern here, but just using D, 5 chord. Hey, just a quick note that as we go on in the video, I'm not going to bore you going measure by measure with the simple input of notes into my software. I thought it would be much more valuable for you to see the thought process of creating the music and know that the transcribing is indeed happening as each idea comes to life. So with that, let's get back to the music. So now that I had my rhythmic pattern in place, it was just a matter of putting my chord progression up against it. So here's a clip of the initial stages of me figuring this out. Remember, you can also use voice memos on your phone, which I normally do, but for whatever reason, for this particular piece, I decided to make a video of the rough ideas coming together. So it's not pretty, but let's take a look. So the next section that I wanted to work on was the pre-chorus, or what I envision as a pre-chorus if I were actually songwriting. So I still didn't have any ideas of what I wanted to do, so I decided to just mess around with the scale. So look at what I did. I went down the scale, just a G scale in descending order, and then I figured, what about if I harmonize that, diatonic thirds? Then maybe if I don't go all the way down, just halfway down and stylize that. That worked. And then I make it outline the one chord. And I figured what would be the next logical move, and I figured, hey, just go to the 4. And I just kept that same rhythmic pattern. And when I put it all together, here's what I got. And there came that bridge between the introduction and the main theme, or what I considered my pre-chorus. So let's take a look at this video of me putting all these ideas together in the initial stages. So I had some components of the music already. I had my introduction, I had what I considered my pre-chorus because I was thinking about songwriting. Now I needed to develop the main theme, but I still had no idea where I wanted to go. So instead of, again, staring at that blank page, I gave myself a limitation. I figured, why don't you start with that one chord and give yourself a limitation of arpeggios. So I arpeggiated the first chord. Okay, then I figured, all right, put it in tempo. Easy enough. Now I wanted to go right back down the scale, but with style. So I figured maybe move in diatonic thirds again. So I could go. Maybe not all the way down the scale, maybe halfway down the scale and stylized. So. And then I want to go all the way down, so let me arpeggiate right back down. Then I figured logically, let me move to the 4 chord, keeping that arpeggiated theme. And then I figured logically again, why don't I try going to the 2 chord and see what happens. Again, keeping that arpeggiated theme. And then moving to the 5 chord. So when you put it all together, here's what I got. Now, all of that main theme was developed by that one limitation of arpeggio. That's all I did. And I plugged things into the progression, and that's what I came up with. So let's take a look at this video of me developing this in its infancy. So there you see a lot of my ideas coming together. It wasn't perfect, but it was just a rough draft, and I was able to get the ideas down and later on make some tweaks to it. If you notice something, I was having a hard time moving my fingers that fast, right? So what I ended up doing was adding some violin specific techniques like left hand pizzicato, and then also some guitar specific techniques like hammer-ons, where you are hitting the fingerboard to create the sound on the string. So you're hearing in later versions so I have those two techniques added in to make sure that I'm able to move at that tempo. All right, with those sections in place in the music, I wanted to move on. And this is where the mind map really came in handy. Remember when I talked about Vacation, it's not just go, go, go. There's some fast-paced moments, there's some slower-paced moments, there's some in-between moments. And when I thought about that, I wanted to move the music in that same direction. So we started out really high energy, and I wanted to move into this more even-keeled, maybe picture time. Here's where we're going to be taking pictures. And I also wanted to bridge from where we just were in the opening into this middle section. So what I did was I restated that opening section. Well, you first heard it as. So now to bridge that section over to the next, I figured why not restate it with a variation. And then maybe to add a little style, a little flair, maybe emulate a bass line. And put it together, you get this. So doing that glissando, that slide, that brought me back down to my 2 chord. And I figured why not just outline the 2 in the 5 chord. So here's what I had. So I'm just going back and forth between that 2 and the 5 chord, and of course I'm adding embellishments in there, so you're going to hear stuff like this. More of those left-hand pizzicatos and those hammer-ons. More of those embellishments. Now let's take a look at this clip or this rough cut of me trying to put all these ideas together. All right, so I have a lot of these sections in place and I wanted to move on to the next piece of the music or the next piece of my vacation. And again, this mind map is coming back into play. So I got to think about when I'm on vacation, there is going to be this downtime, this lounging time, right? And what does that look like? And I wanted to, why not restate the opening where we had that strum pattern like the ukulele and vary it. But before I got there, I needed to bridge it somehow. So I restated the opening theme that you heard once, like this. All right, so I'm going to play that. And then maybe complicate the rhythm a little bit. And then end up on that 5 chord. And then that can lead me into the next section where I'm going to strum, go back to that opening, the introduction where I had, but change it up a little bit. Let's vary it. So let's change the voicing of that 1 chord. Now 5 to 6. 3, 3, 4. Repeat. Now 4 to 1 and 6. And I just follow the progression, so I ended up back on that 5 chord. And now in the next section, this would be the ending, because we've had our lounge time. We're tired. I think it's time to start thinking about getting ready to go back to the real world. So let's restate the first theme that we had. All right. But now we got to find a way to lead into our rendezvous, to our leaving from our vacation. So the ending theme that I put in there was it's just a sequence all the way up. And from there, more embellishments. So there you have it, the entire composition and its evolution from beginning to the end, and my thought process on how I work these things out. I hope you guys were able to get a couple good ideas for your own music making process. The next step is to take all these rough ideas and notate them. Now for me, I was able to practice and get this up to a faster yet comfortable speed. And I'm going to leave you with that video as we close. So thank you for watching, and happy music making.